Hey guys, welcome to Topical Date here, and today I'm talking about my top 20 favorite movies of all time. Incredibly difficult list to make, but content doesn't create itself, so here we are. Number 20 is definitely the newest one on my list, but I really couldn't think of anything that I would automatically want to replace it with, and I also just wanted to put it on the list. But it's definitely the most recent one, and I typically try not to let super recent movies, like recency bias, affect this, but it just has a lot of like Nate stuff in it, and so I'm pretty confident that this probably won't fall out of my top 25 movies, maybe ever. So I went ahead and gave the number 20 spot to Everything Everywhere All at Once. Incredible movie. It is right up Nate's alley. I will watch that movie probably at least once a year, maybe twice a year, and not regret watching it ever again. And I was really glad that a movie that I felt like should have won Best Picture finally actually won Best Picture, because it's been a long time since that happened. Number 19 for me is Lost in Translation. I really dig this movie. I'm glad we got to talk about it when we did our Bill Murray list last week. But I really love movies that have important life lessons in them, but not necessarily your typical movie life lessons. And I really love movies that maybe are specifically about the places that people will go, often unintentionally, when they are feeling hurt or lost. And this movie is a really great depiction of two people who are feeling hurt and lost, who end up meeting each other. And I really enjoyed that the setting of this location being not where they are from and not where they speak the language almost isolates them together even more, and how that relationship helps them process what they are going through individually and the decisions that they make because of that. Number 18 for me is going to be Inside Out. I rewatched the last top 10 favorite movies list that I did from like a very long time ago, and this one fell considerably. It was in my top 10 at one point. I still think it's a really important movie. One of the best, if not the best, animated movies we've ever gotten. I do actually have an animated movie on my list higher than this. But yeah, really important movie about understanding feelings. There's lots for kids to learn from this movie. There's lots from adults to learn from this movie individually. There's lots for parents to learn from this movie. And I think the way that they gave each of these feelings their own personality and highlighted how important it is that they all be cohesive and allowed to work together and not forcefully separated is really important. So good job, Pixar. Number 17, I never realized how much I loved this movie until the sequel came out, and this has since turned into a movie that I have had on the back, like on in the background while I'm doing other stuff consistently over the last year and a half. I love the soundtrack. I love the acting. I love how I don't know if disappointed is the right word, but I love how probably annoyed Strange Wang is going to be when I say that this movie made my top 20, but I have no regrets. My number 17 is Top Gun. Tom Cruise's character in this movie is just like, he's arrogant, he's egotistical, but he still cares about his friend. And while I probably would not like this person at all in real life, I really love watching a movie about him, and airplanes are cool. So there you go. Number 16 is a movie called Warrior, which is, in my opinion, maybe the best sports movie of all time. It should definitely be in the conversation. It is definitely the best combat sports movie of all time, in my opinion. Warrior is excellent. You get awesome performances from Tom Hardy and Joel Edgerton. And it does a really, really good job of filming the combat sequences in an incredibly engaging way, while also having this side story that is incredibly deep and emotional at the same time, and it absolutely knocks it out of the park. And I think Warrior's incredibly underrated. People don't talk about it enough. So, number 15 for me is The Truman Show. I love this movie. This is like a total comfort movie for me. I love the themes of it. I love the way it ends. I am really big on the idea of not being controlled by the outside world. And when you are in a situation where you realize that you are, finding a way to break free. So that being the main theme of this movie, I really appreciate it a lot. And I think it also has a lot to say about the importance of having trustworthy people in your life. And is honestly also just like a really great like psychological study of a film. Number 14 for me, it's another one just for fun. Definitely like a big nostalgic connection to it. Another movie that used to be in my top 10, but has dropped down a little bit. But number 14 is Dumb and Dumber. I think this is one of the funniest movies ever made. It is endlessly quotable, and I just have a lot of really fond memories of watching this with my dad and my cousins growing up. At one point in time, me and one of my cousins watched this movie like 3 times in a row because we were determined that we were going to memorize every single line from the whole movie. And to this day, I can still quote probably a good 85 to 90% of this movie. So I really appreciate Dumb and Dumber, and it has been a very welcome like escape and lighthearted lift for me for pretty much my whole life. So number 13 for me is my other animated movie, and it is SpiderMan Into the Spider-Verse. Another one that's like, I guess, fairly recent when you consider it, but I definitely think we've had enough time to sit with it. I think this is maybe, I would put this obviously above Inside Out. I think this is maybe the best animated movie of all time. Not only in terms of what you can do with animation, but what you can do with storytelling, how you can pack a lot of emotional depth. It has sort of this thing I was talking about with Lost in Translation before, where I really love movies that have important life lessons but aren't necessarily like your typical life lessons, ones that are more about just finding your place in the world, navigating difficult changes and like tougher themes and things like this. And I also appreciate the balls that this movie had. They just 100% killed Spider-Man in this movie, and I think that's pretty sick. So that's my number 13. Number 12 for me is Vertigo. I think this is damn near a perfect movie. I really, really love it. Alfred Hitchcock is an absolute genius. I don't know that anyone will ever come along that is able to make consistent psychological thrillers the way that he does. But in Vertigo, you get a great psychological thriller. You get a great psychological thriller. You get James Stewart, and you get a really interesting and complex story that makes you question things along with the main character almost up until the very end. And there are some things that this movie will have you trying to figure out until the very end that you just won't guess until you figure out, until it just tells you what happens. And I appreciate that. Number 11 for me is Goodwill Hunting. This is one of the first movies I watched that really showed me what movies could do on an emotional level while still giving you really interesting and grounded characters. I think kind of up until Goodwill Hunting, my experience with like emotional movies were like Hallmark movies that my mom had on and stuff like that, or just like movies that were entrenched in me that I wasn't supposed to like quote unquote chick flicks and things like that. So to see Goodwill Hunting, a character about a guy, I am also a guy who has just had an incredibly rough life. I have not had an incredibly rough life, but to see him like sort through and process and learn things about himself, to see him encounter like unconditional love from someone other than who he expects it from for the first time is really interesting. And I think there's like a cool lesson to be learned there, because he has Ben Affleck in the movie, who does love him unconditionally, but he has expected that love from him pretty much his entire life. And so this is the first time he's encountering it from somebody who he has just met. Therefore, he can't accept it. And that is some real world shit. And I love the way the movie navigates it. Robin Williams in this movie is also incredible, being that mentor to him. And it has one of the best endings in movie history, in my opinion. So, number 10 for me is going to be Django Unchained. As far as coolness, style, engaging action, character development, storytelling, this movie has all of it. To me, I really do think objectively this is Quentin Tarantino's best movie. It is quotable. It has some of the most memorable characters in movie history in it. And Django's just a fucking badass. And it's fun to watch him do badass things on a big screen, small screen. I've seen Django so much, I'll watch it on my phone screen. I just always get the same enjoyment out of it. And it just puts a smile on my face. But number 9 for me is going to be Heat. In my opinion, the best crime thriller of all time. I love the tone of this movie. But what I really love is the thrill that I get from this like cat and mouse-esque game between Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. I want to say Danny DeVito so bad. I don't know why. But it's not. It's Robert De Niro. Those are very different people. And that would be a very different movie. But thankfully, it's not Danny DeVito. And we did get the movie we got. So I love bank robbery movies. This has one of the greatest like shootout scenes in movie history, in my opinion. While still also giving you really great like side stories for both of these main characters that is actively playing into the decisions that they are making during this dangerous game that they are playing with each other. And that coffee house scene where they meet up with each other is impeccable. Such a good addition to the film, and just like perfectly sets the tone for things going forward from there. Number 8 for me is Casablanca. I really do objectively think this is also a near perfect movie. You have incredibly interesting characters. Rick, with his like sly coolness, but like showing cracks of the heart underneath, even from the very beginning. Obviously, you get more of it as he like opens up towards the end. Is incredible. Freaking homie who owns the other bar and is just swatting fucking flies all the time. It's like, that's interesting in its own right. You're giving not necessarily emotional depth, but you're giving like characterizations and interesting little pieces to every character in this movie. The plot is really interesting because ultimately the bad guy of the movie is Nazis, but really like kind of the bad guy of the movie is Rick's fight with himself. Am I going to choose what makes me happy, or am I going to choose what is best for the good of the world? And then ultimately seeing that Rick's principles are more important to him than his personal desires, I think is a really cool an interesting like way for that character to develop. So it's incredibly quotable. Even if you've never seen Casablanca, you have heard a quote from Casablanca before, and the reason that you have heard a quote from Casablanca before is because that movie is absolutely incredible. So you should watch Casablanca if you haven't seen Casablanca. Number 7 for me is going to be The Princess Bride. It is just like the best fairy tale movie ever made. It is funny. The dialogue is incredibly witty. Every character that you encounter in this movie has like some level of importance. Like, there's not a single person in this movie who is wasted even a little bit. So it's like, obviously you have your main characters. Like, you have Wesley, you have Inigo, you have Fezzik, you have Princess Buttercup, Humperdinck, the Six-Fingered Man, and like that's kind of like your core. So we get a lot of them, but even the characters that kind of like come and go throughout the film are still really important to it. I love the fact that you get introduced to the story by this grandpa reading it to his son, and because that means we are not watching the events play out live. It is a storybook. They did such a good job of making it feel like it is actually a storybook come to life. Also a movie that I got introduced when I was very young, a movie that I watched with my dad a lot, so it's really important to me for a lot of reasons outside of that. But also just incredibly quotable. And I would be sad if I did not have this movie to quote with Strange Wang and my family members who have also all loved this movie, because it has brought a lot of joy and laughter to conversations. So, number 6 for me is About Time. Best use of time travel ever in a movie. I love that it doesn't get all tied up in the mechanics of it. Like, we're not worried about splitting timelines here. We're not worried about all these other things. It just is what it is. But through that, the character still learns what can happen if you go and fuck with time too much. But I think what I really love about this movie is that this movie really pushes for you to understand, or this movie, like, as far as what it just puts in front of your face, spends the whole time trying to convince you that it's a love story. And the love story aspect of About Time is absolutely beautiful and incredible and very important. But really at the heart of this movie, it is a father-son movie. And father-son movies are just always going to naturally fuck with me a little bit in a really good way. And so I really love that About Time. It's an incredibly sweet movie. It is a great, like, I want to watch something that's going to make me feel something, but there isn't, like, too much drama in it. It has the perfect vibe. It stays in its lane the whole time, which is right where it needs to be. And one of the few movies that makes me, at the very least, tear up a little bit every time I watch it. Number 5 for me is going to be La La Land. I love movies about making movies. I love musicals. What I specifically love about La La Land is how much it calls back to, like, the musicals of the 30s, 40s, and 50s in, like, old Hollywood, because I grew up watching all those with my aunt, and so La La Land just immediately helps me pick up on all the vibes from that. So the influence that La La Land got from, like, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and Gene Kelly and all those movies is just automatically super endearing to me, because those movies were really important to me. But I also really love movies that tell other realistic relationship stories. Like, there are plenty of people who, quote unquote, live happily ever after. It is not an unrealistic thing to tell a story about someone who meets the person that they are going to spend the rest of their life with, and they fall in love, and although nothing is ever always perfect, they end up being completely happy together. That's not unrealistic, and there are infinite movies for you to choose that tell that story. What there are not infinite of is movies that tell a story about two people falling in love truly and deeply, and then them learning that that relationship isn't necessarily what is going to happen. And I specifically love La La Land because La La Land shows you that even though this relationship didn't work out, both of these people went on to be completely happy. Like, Seb opened his bar, he's stoked about it, he's finally achieving his dream, doing what he loved. She goes on, becomes a famous actress, ends up falling in love with someone else, has a baby, and they even have their little moment at the end where they acknowledge that, you know, we're good. There's no bitterness. That little nod essentially says, I'm so thankful for you and everything that you added to my life. And that's it. But then it also gives you the other half where it shows what would have happened had they worked out. And guess what? Still incredibly happy. So the first time I watched La La Land and the guy she ends up marrying walks in and it's not Seb, I got absolutely infuriated because you want it to be them very badly, and there's nothing wrong with that. But then thinking about the rest of that outside of that adds a whole other layer to that movie to me. It is also absolutely beautiful, and I absolutely love the soundtrack. I listen to the soundtrack from La La Land like all the freaking time. Like, maybe not necessarily all the way through, but at least once a week, I will think of a song from La La Land and be like, I want to listen to that, and then listen to it. So, great movie. Number 4 for me is going to be The Grand Budapest Hotel. I love Wes Anderson. I think that he is easily one of the most consistent and best working directors. His movies hit for me almost every time. Even his movies that I like less than others, I still see a lot of value in them, and they make me think and give me things to pick apart. His creativity is, I don't even think unparalleled or unrivaled is the right word. It just exists in its own space. Like, nobody does what Wes Anderson does. Anybody who has tried to do what Wes Anderson does, it just doesn't feel the same. And like I'll see shots in some movies and I'll be like, that's a Wes Anderson shot, but it doesn't feel like a Wes Anderson movie. Like, nobody can duplicate this guy's brain. And I understand that it is not necessarily for everyone, but it is absolutely for me. And to me, Grand Budapest is kind of like this fully encapsulating bubble of everything that is Wes Anderson. The color palette, the dialogue, the quirky characters. Every side character has like at least some little special thing about them to make you recognize them and stand out. No one in the movie feels wasted or unimportant. And with this one, you get like an adventurous little like heist / murder mystery. There's thriller elements. You get Zero and Agatha's relationship, which is incredibly sweet and endearing to me, especially when you get to hear the conversations from older Zero, talking to Jude Law's character about everything, and the fact that this whole story that we're seeing is essentially an older Zero retelling it, and then thinking about it from the fact that all of this is a memory from his perspective, just makes it even more endearing to me. I love Grand Budapest. I will watch that movie consistently until the day I die. It makes me very happy. Number 3 is going to be Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. To me, Raiders and The Last Crusade are both like 99 out of 100, if not 100. I think they are both near perfect movies. Last Crusade hits a few more emotional beats for me because it has that father-son element. And I think they're absolutely hilarious together, because it helps you get a little bit of understanding of how Indy became who he is as a person, in that he is everything that he loves because his father loved it. And he also has this like bitterness of like the void that his father left because he wasn't like necessarily a super great dad, and then getting to hear his dad explain why he thought he was a good dad, and it trips Indy up. Like, this guy who has been kind of this like stoic, I can take anything, I can find a way out of any situation, and then you put him in that conversation where he's like, Dad, we never talked about anything, and his dad's just like, well, what do you want to talk about? And he's just like, you get to see that side of Indy where there's clearly like a layer that you want to break through, but it's tough. And then obviously the way the movie plays out, they do break through it to an extent to where even if they necessarily didn't have a big talk about everything, they're still cool with each other. And I think that's a really, to me, super relatable father-son relationship, because while I am not necessarily going on all these crazy adventures, that is a very similar relationship that I had with my dad, and that movie helped me like reconcile a bunch of stuff in my own brain. So super appreciative of The Last Crusade for that. And then number 2 for me, tough to pick one, so just pick the original. So it's gonna be Star Wars, A New Hope, if you will. This movie was like definitely one of the earliest movies that I watched over and over and over again. First introduction really to how much a film score can affect how you are emotionally connecting to what is on screen. certainly don't need to explain how good John Williams is at his job. Everyone knows how good John Williams is at his job. But growing up and like the things that I loved as like a kid, like video game, Pokemon, like the shows that I used to watch on like WB Kids and Fox Kids and Cartoon Network growing up, I've just always gravitated towards like science fiction stories, and like fantasy stories, and anything that is just like out of the realm of our world, I've always just found incredibly fascinating and interesting. Star Wars being this massive like space epic that combines elements from all of those things into one, has just always captured my attention. There's a lot of real world parallels in Star Wars. There's a lot of characters that I personally attached to at a very young age that influenced heavily like who I decided I wanted to be as a person when I grew up. So Star Wars is probably easily the most influential movie / series of movies that will ever exist to me personally, and I'll always appreciate it. But number one, it wasn't a hard rule. I was trying to see if I could make this list and still make it what I would consider a true list without repeating any directors. Couldn't do it. Didn't care that much, but only did it once. Because to me, Steven Spielberg will always be, to me, the greatest director of all time. So, number one for me, my favorite movie of all time is Jurassic Park. It is just the most fun I've ever had watching a movie. And every time I watch it, I have the same amount of fun that I had watching it the first time. When I was a kid, I thought dinosaurs were the coolest thing on the entire planet, even though they didn't exist anymore. Jurassic Park is the first movie that I can remember seeing in theaters, even though I was 4 and probably should not have been seeing Jurassic Park in theaters, but who cares? I disagree. I should have been seeing Jurassic Park in theaters, because it just opened up this whole world of imagination and creativity to me. Again, showing what you can do when you combine a film score with what you're seeing visually. What they did that early on in the 90s with CGI was absolutely incredible, because back then when CGI wasn't this like super commonly used thing, therefore to people in the early 90s, our eyes weren't as attuned to immediately spotting out CGI and pointing it out as fake. Like that, to me, that shit was real. And Jurassic Park is kind of the first movie to show me what movies can do, which is take something that doesn't exist, put it on a screen, and convince your brain that this shit is real. And that's incredibly powerful to an incredibly young person. And it had a lot to do with who I ended up being as I grew up. And yeah, to me, can't beat it. All the characters are super interesting. They each have their own certain thing going on, but have to work together to overcome this absolute catastrophe. I love the messages that are in this movie about not trying to play God, which I think is something that a lot of people could still learn from today. So Jurassic Park is easily my favorite movie of all time. It will probably never change. But let me know what your favorite movies are down in the comment section below. Scroll back up, hit the like button, and subscribe.
It's not a game, it's a rich thing.